Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Superhero Pantheon. It's a brand new feed with the same concept. We said we had a surprise tonight, and all I can say is two words: Wakanda forever.
And the actor goes to Black Panther.
I didn't think I was going to have to speak. Obviously, we thank SAG-AFTRA for this moment of appreciation and celebration of this film. Thank our director, Ryan Coogler. He's a genius. Gotta run through the names of the execs: Bob Iger, Alan Horn, Nate Moore, Louis D'Esposito, Victoria Alonso, Kevin. I gotta save the best for last. I'm not gonna forget Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige. And this cast, this ensemble that when I think of going to work every day and the passion and the intelligence, the resolve, the discipline that everybody showed, I also think of two questions that we all have received during the course of multiple publicity runs. And one is, did we know that this movie was going to receive this kind of response? Meaning, was it going to make billions of dollars? Was it going to make $1 billion? Was it going to still be around during this award season? And the second question is, has it changed the industry? Has it actually changed the way this industry works, how it sees us? And my answer to that is to be young, gifted, and Black.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cusson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and all of your favorite podcast apps through our new home, The Real World. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover the show and the great folks that The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so in one of two ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, you can still find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. Brian, what we are going to be doing tonight is we are going to be using our best judgment. And unlike the Academy winners, we are not going to give the Green Book any credit, nor will we give anyone associated with Bohemian Rhapsody any credit either. Instead, we are going to be talking about a movie that we've already discussed on this podcast, Black Panther, and we are going to do something very special tonight because Black Panther is now a 3-time Academy Award winning movie. It unfortunately did not win Best Picture, but a monumental feat as Marvel Studios finally has 3 Academy Awards to its name, as it won for Best Costume Design and Best Production Design. And those winners for Black Panther are the first 2 Black people to ever win for those respective awards. And of course, it also won for Best Score. And the person who won that award also won a Grammy earlier this month. So Brian, even though I think we are both disappointed with the fact that it did not win for Best Picture, it was still nominated, and it is still a 3-time Academy Award winner.
Man, I just can't believe we're at this point. You know what I mean? Like, I never thought that we would have an MCU movie to be even considered for Best Picture. You know what I mean? And the fact that we got here tonight, and it's disappointing, but, based on the momentum, you can kind of figure out that it probably wasn't going to win at the end. But at the same time, like, for a good hour on Twitter, people were going Wakanda forever because of these wins and the recognition. And, I mean, the idea that that was the first Black person to win for Best Costume Design just kind of blew my mind. Like, totally blew my mind. in the whole Academy's history. So just things like that, man. Just a special night for everyone. It's kind of an awakening, I think. It kind of puts, comic book movies back up into that echelon of what can you do for a Best Picture, and you can take a comic book movie and turn it into a Best Picture. And I mean, I'm still blown away that we heard the name producer Kevin Feige, you know what I mean, in the nominations. I'm still blown away by that, but still just a tremendous night. And yeah, I mean, based on, it came out a year ago. And a year ago, we were talking about it on the podcast about, what could be talking about a year from now at the Oscars. And here we are. And, based on that and just based on the legacy of what happened tonight, we can already say where it belongs in the Pantheon.
All right, Brian, before we get into that, since we are in a brand new feed, we are going to go through what I guess is kind of a soft reboot of the show. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to discuss how we evaluate the movies. And we have been doing this podcast for just over a year. We have reviewed approximately 50 movies. And basically what we do is we have 5 different categories. The heroes, where we talk about the protagonists of every movie. Part of that encompasses the hero's journey that they go on. Part of it also encompasses the performance itself. That also goes for the villains as well. So much of that has to do with how the villains are portrayed, what kind of pathos is involved, and as well as the performances. The story elements, which very oftentimes are the weakest element of every superhero movie, but that is so important to talk about. What is the actual plot that is going on? Now, we used to do something where we called it the visual aspect of the movie, but we realized that there are so many aspects to cover in one category. So that includes everything from the editing to the score. We very frequently will mention the score of a particular superhero movie. Also, we talk about the costume design as the suits, as Brian is wont to do. So we changed the visual category to the technical category. And of course, we assess the legacy of the movie that we are reviewing. And for the most part, what we are going to try to do is to try to give it at least one full year before we assess the legacy. And for some movies, we may wait even longer before we can fully evaluate the legacy of a specific movie. Basically, any film that gets an 80 is put into our Pantheon, and any film that receives a 20 or below goes into the pile of shame. Brian, before I read the movies that have thus far made it into each category, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I like to cover like the technical part of it. Like, it's good that we kind of went over, because at the beginning I felt like we were kind of missing some stuff that we would sometimes we would forget to talk about, like the score especially, and like some of the aspects of the score. So I'm glad we kind of fixed that and kind of put it into one big kind of category that kind of covers it all, and we get to talk about a lot of about colors and editing and stuff like that. So that's a good redux that we did. So I'm glad we talked about that.
All right. These are the movies that have been entered into the Superhero Pantheon in our first year on the podcast. The very first movie that we reviewed was Superman 1978, the originator of the modern superhero genre, that had to go in first. We've also put a number of MCU movies. We've been very MCU heavy, and we'll get to why in just a second here. We've put Iron Man, The Avengers, Captain America, Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Guardians of the Galaxy. And because we lost a bet to the hosts of Ben and Matt's Marvelous Adventures, another podcast that you can find in the archives of the real world, Iron Man 3 has also been entered into the Superhero Pantheon. The other movie is a non-Marvel movie, and that, of course, is The Incredibles, the first one that we put in back in the summer of 2018. The reason that we have been so MCU heavy, of course, is because of the fact that Avengers Infinity War came out in April of last year. Avengers Endgame will be coming out in April of this year, and we wanted to make sure that we got through the MCU, which we have officially done. We reviewed every single MCU movie, either theatrical or for the Pantheon. And that means that we will be able to get to a number of movies that we've been meaning to. With the X-Men franchise ending its Fox run in June, we will be having a very special X-Men month later on this year. And we will also be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Summer of Batman by reviewing every single Batman theatrical release, except for the 1989 version. So we have a number of movies that I have a feeling will be entered into the Pantheon very soon.
We also got some animated movies coming up. Some you may have forgotten, some you may have heard of. Mask of the Phantasm, we're going to be talking about during the Summer of Batman, but we're also going to be talking about other, minor films that you've forgotten about, something like Megamind, stuff like that. We're also going to be talking about some international movies down the line. We'll be looking at an international month, probably at the end of the year, something like that, because there's a bunch of international superhero movies that we even touched on, but have clearly influenced a lot of the directors in the American market. So that's coming soon too.
Absolutely. And of course, on the other hand, we have the pile of shame, as we have 3, not DCEU movies, but 3 DC movies have already been put into the pile of shame. That would be Catwoman, Green Lantern, and Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Christopher Reeves, thus far the only actor to appear in both the superhero Pantheon and the pile of shame. We, of course, also have Fantastic Four 2015, which is god-awful, and I have a feeling that we may have another actor joining the prestigious list of being both in the Pantheon and the pile of shame, if you know what I mean, Brian. And, of course, the legendary forgotten Zoom, starring Tim Allen. What a piece of crap that turned out to be. But that is our pile of shame.
Yeah, and the only one that really probably broke me was Catwoman. And that was probably the only time I was kind of deliriously laughing at myself watching a movie that it was just kind of like, what the hell is going on here? Of course, you can go back and listen to that episode and find out how broken I was.
Yes, and I'm sure that some people are going to be wondering about the archives. That is something that we are going to be working on these next few months, getting uploaded all of the previous episodes that we have done previously onto the Real World feed. That is something, like I said, that we are going to be very patient with, but especially as we get into the future months, we'll figure it out. But tonight we are going to talk about Black Panther based on our criteria. And one of the things that we are going to try to do as well is get that episode of Superhero Pantheon, because we did review it back when it first came out theatrically just about a year ago. And I had a chance to watch the movie just a little while ago. And I have to be honest with you, Brian, I was really impressed by how well it held up, and there's so many amazing things that I could say about it. But when I think about the score, the production design, the costume design, those are the things that I will remember, and you can see why it won those 3 Academy Awards. And it's also worth mentioning that even though this movie did not win Best Picture, it did win the most important SAG award. The SAG award is given in March, and this movie beat other more, let's say, prestige movies, legitimately won for Best Ensemble. And I think when we talk about this movie, we have to talk about the incredible ensemble that has been assembled here, from Chadwick Boseman to Letitia Wright to Lupita Nyong'o to Winston Duke to Michael B. Jordan to so many other people that I could forget. Sterling K. Brown, Forrest Whitaker. I mean, there's so many incredible performers in this movie, and it's easy to see why this was mentioned throughout awards season.
Yeah, and you also forget Andy Serkis, but yeah, just the amazing cast coming together for this. I don't know, it felt like a moment in time watching this movie in theaters and watching it multiple times afterwards in theaters, and each time finding something new, finding some new emotional connections to the movie that I never thought I would have towards a movie. It still holds up for me as the best MCU movie. And I say that because I've seen so many Avengers. I mean, I've watched Endgame so many times as well. And as much as that, puts a smile on your face and you feel like that's, one of the best cinematic joyrides you can have, I still feel like Black Panther's just got this emotional tone to it that, you tie in with the characters that, I mean, it's got one of those, villains that you care for so much that you wish didn't die. And it's usually in a superhero movie like this, and we've been through so many superhero movies, it kind of feels like the villain you kind of want to just get off your screen because he sucks. But in this case, man, Michael B. Jordan just knocked it so out of the park that I wish that he can come back. But alas, he's dead in the movie. Spoiler. But, man, just the way that they put this movie together, and the soundtrack was amazing, and the fact that you had these prominent, rappers on the soundtrack as well, and it was very mainstream, and the way he was able to do mainstream and high art at the same time for a superhero movie just combining those elements together, man, it's a special time and it's a special moment. And I feel like I don't know if we can get anything higher than this. I'm hoping that Marvel can kind of aim higher now, and maybe put some experimental directors on board and try to tell some unique stories, and kind of go from there. Because this could be a launching pad, and I hope that this is not the peak.
Absolutely. And other things that are worth noting is the fact that Ryan Coogler brought in consultants who are experts on African history and politics to work on defining Wakanda and making it such a unique and special place. And it is definitely some place that I think felt very realistic, especially by the end, with all of the incredible costumes, the incredible design of the city. And think about this. This was the #1 box office domestic grosser for 2018. This movie made $700 million, not factoring in worldwide grosses. This movie made more than the Avengers sequel. This made more than Solo. This made more than a Jurassic World sequel. People forget that The Incredibles 2 made $600 million, and this movie outgrossed it by $100 million. It's unbelievable to think about the fact that this movie that was probably going to be successful in so many ways was so much more successful from a cultural standpoint, the stickiness of it, the Wakanda Forever, the fashion that has spawned from this, and the fact that I think this brought a whole new audience of people, an underrepresented population in the movies, felt like they had something that they could finally connect to. And that's not to say that people of color are not going to Marvel movies, but I think you finally could see the power of what this representation could do on screen, not just because they were people of color, but because of the fact that there were so many prominent female characters in this movie. And I think that's what makes it so special, is the fact that Shuri and Okoye and Nakia and those people were as important, and in some ways more important, than many of the male characters like Killmonger and General Ross, and some people would argue Black Panther, but that just speaks to the cultural relevancy of this movie as well.
Yeah, and I remember being in the theater, and I think I talked about this on the original podcast, but I can tell it was a new audience because people had never seen Black Panther's dad dying before, which we all saw, all the MCU marks have seen in Civil War. But when I hear gasps in the theater from people who have never seen an MCU movie before, it opened my mind. Like, it was just like, this is a moment where we're bringing in a new audience and we're telling these new stories. And even though it's like some like made up world and made up land and vibranium and all these like scientific elements going into it, like it felt like this real cultural moment. And like, it was just awesome to see, man. And going in the theater, like it was a largely, black audience when I went, and it was just like, this is so unique to me and so cool to see, and that, like, I'm hoping, like I said, like, this is a launching pad, and we kind of got some repercussions of it, I felt, with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, again, with more diversity and more stories about people of color, and just identifying yourself on screen, and the idea of, like, seeing different, Spanish on screen as well, in a superhero movie as well, like, I think a lot of that spread from Black Panther, and because of the success of Black Panther, it made even that much. I think it made Spider-Man that much more emotional in tone. I think just because it's just coming off of that, and you feel like, man, you get this emotional story with Black Panther, and then months later you get Spider-Man to the Spider-Verse, and you get some of those similar tones. So I think you can see like the repercussions from that, just like even a year later. I mean, it's a landmark, I think, and it's probably going to go in the National Treasury, I think.
For sure. And I think when we talk about the heroes, there's so much that we could discuss. I think when we think about Chadwick Boseman, I think at the time, I think people generally considered him to be almost the most uninteresting character in this movie. But I think the way that Boseman has conducted himself over the last year, and even though he's kind of the lead protagonist in this movie, in so many ways he has also felt like kind of the leader of this movie and championing it, and that's been something that's been really cool to see. And I think the two things that I also want to talk about, and I think this is important to note because there are so many actors who I think were really elevated by this movie. The fact that Lupita Nyong'o, even though she is an Academy Award winner, basically being cast in Star Wars, almost meaning nothing to the new franchise. And now she's in this movie and has gotten a lot of attention for it. And now she's going to be in Jordan Peele's next movie. And the same is true for Winston Duke, who plays M'Baku. And so much of this conversation is going to be about kind of what this movie has done. And I think that it's really impressive just the way that this has elevated so many people. And I think a lot of it has to do with the character work and the fact that, a.k.a. is somebody who, the actor plays Michonne on The Walking Dead, at least for now. But the fact that Michonne has almost had nothing to do on that show for so long, and the fact that it's just so funny to me that a.k.a. seemingly gets more attention in this movie, and that Denai Guerrera is able to do so much with this role in what could have been a very easily a nothing role. And there are a lot of, we've talked a lot about in Marvel movies some of these nothing female roles, but she is able to define herself and define this character so well. And I'm really glad that she's leaving The Walking Dead, because my hope is that we can get a 6-episode miniseries on Disney Plus featuring a.k.a. And if not, then she is definitely going to be in movies and doing other things with her career that do not involve being chased by zombies. And I think that's a really good thing. And just this cast and what they were able to do, especially on the hero side, just so much great character development on every angle. And I don't think Chadwick Boseman is getting the credit that he deserves.
Yeah, for me, it's really about the scenes with him and his dad that just really get to me in this movie. Him going back, and it's when he sees his father's soul. That the whole scene right there echoes the whole Lion King scene. And I know you figured out what I was talking about. And they kind of played the same similar, notes from the Lion King soundtrack to kind of give you that same feel. And then it just kind of just gets you emotionally going. It gets me emotionally going to that scene. And then with these strong female characters, it's great because I'm so used to seeing the damsel in distress. And really in this movie, there was hardly any damsel in distress at all, right? If anything, they were all kicking ass and fighting equally on their own. And no one really needed saving at any point. Everyone kind of fought their own battles. Except maybe Shuri at the end. But other than that, she's not even a true warrior. She's a scientist, so that makes sense. But I just feel like they really took these tropes and just rewrote them and kind of just did away with them and made their own personal story. The idea that they opened it at Oakland, right, and just Oakland and the way that Ryan Coogler has his connection to Oakland and especially in you talk about Fruitvale Station. It's just the way that he connects everything together with the characters. It's great, and just taking those tropes and just turning them on their ear. And I feel like instead of the token black guy, we got the token white guy in this movie, which is kind of refreshing to see with Martin Freeman. So, taking all these things and making them new, and just taking these characters, especially the female characters, and kind of making their own franchise. There's been rumors now that they're going to kind of build something around them, and everyone wants Shuri to have a scene with Tony Stark and possibly be the next brains of the MCU. So. In terms of that, I'm totally for it, man. This movie totally opened a lot of doors for a lot of people. And in terms of the heroes, man, it just felt like they wrote everything the way it needed to. Nothing too crazy and over the top, but I felt like everyone was, written great for what they were. So for me, it's an 8 out of 10.
I'm actually going to go higher than you on this. I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10 because this was absolutely stellar, and I was really trying to fully assess my feelings on this. And I think so much of it is what they do with M'Baku in particular, because he starts out as somebody who is seemingly going to be an antagonist. But what they are able to do is they are able to transfer him over in such a subtle way. It's not something where they beat you over the head with this. And it was just so impressive to watch that for that reason, I am giving this a 9. And I was almost going to give this a 10, but I think that there is just enough lacking with the Black Panther character that I can't go the full Monty here, but there are just so many pleasant surprises. And even in watching the movie again, what I was able to see and just the level of depth that was involved here, I have to give this a 9.
Well, for me, the one slight criticism is the fact that he lost the battle in the middle of the movie, like the first battle on top for the king or the crown with Killmonger. Like, the only thing I felt about that, it was like a little too obvious and cliche doing that particular scene, especially in the middle of the movie. And it's obvious that he's gonna probably lose and then come back. So from that point on, it kind of felt a little too predictable. But that's kind of like my only criticism, because I'm so used to seeing that kind of scene in the middle of a movie where it's like the bad guy and the good guy, and the good guy's probably going to lose because he's got to work for that revenge and the hero's darkest hour and coming up from that and blah blah blah. But I thought that was just a little too predictable for me.
Which is ironic because Michael B. Jordan in Creed 2 and what happens in the middle of that movie. It's just funny how that works out. All right, let's talk about the villains. And of course, Michael B. Jordan, he's in one scene in the first hour of this movie, and I had forgotten that, and then he's obviously in it a great deal in the second half. But when you talk about somebody who is just completely controlling the scene, I mean, he is absolutely phenomenal in this movie. And I would make a very strong argument for him being nominated for Best Supporting Actor. And the fact that he wasn't, I think, kind of stinks. But Michael B. Jordan is absolutely great. And he has one of the best last lines that I think you could ever ask of a character. And the way that he is treated with a lot of respect, and the fact that his viewpoint has been written about in very legitimate ways, and the fact that it's very complicated, and it is not just as simple as Eric Killmonger is a bad guy, let's kill him. There's a lot of nuance there, and ultimately Killmonger makes the decision to end his own life because he doesn't want to live a life of imprisonment, and this is an issue that is still relevant to people of color in the United States these days. And I just think that to have that level of nuance and to not beat it over people's heads is pretty phenomenal. And Daniel Kaluuya, who of course stole the show in Get Out in a lead role, he's also been a very good supporting actor in both Black Panther as well as Widows last year. And I'm really hoping that he is able to get a lead role at some point in the near future. But I think what he's able to do, while M'Baku transitions from heel to babyface, so to speak, what Wakabi does is he kind of goes on the other end. And again, it is handled extremely well. And it is handled in a very subtle way. And you can kind of see it building throughout the first half of the movie to the point where when he does his big betrayal, you could totally see why it happens. And I think on the other side, Sterling K. Brown is not somebody who I can ever see putting a cape on and being a part of the MCU. So to bring him into this role, I think is great. I think they used Sterling K. Brown perfectly. He's in the movie for about 15 to 20 minutes, almost playing the Marlon Brando role in Superman. But I think he gives that character a lot of pathos, and I just think you really can't ask for a better performer than to have Sterling K. Brown in your movie and not be a superhero. And Andy Serkis is really good in this movie too, as Ulysses. You can't ask for a better collection of villains and antagonists than this group because they all have a singular purpose. They are all fun to watch at times too, even though they're villains, especially Ulysses and the point with the security guard. So this has to be the best group of villains that the MCU has ever had, I think.
Yeah, and it's not just like villains being like scheming kind of villains trying to take over the world and, rub your mustache and put the woman on the train track kind of villain. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is like very complex because you feel like Killmonger is not a villain at all. I still feel like that. Like, I watched this movie, and even though he does a robbery at the beginning and blah, 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 I still feel like Claw's more of like a villain, and Killmonger is just like a really radicalized, social revolutionary kind of guy, right? And he's trying to change the world, and he's trying to like arm his brothers and sisters around the world who've been oppressed. And I get that, man. I get that frustration, and just him talking constantly between him and T'Challa, and that contrast and the conflict of their ideals, and you see that contrast and conflict of ideals with his father and T'Chaka, Black Panther's father, in that opening scene. It's heartbreaking and it's tragic. And we talk about tragedies a lot in terms of villains for, like, you know, all these superhero movies and whatnot, but this feels more personal. It feels like a family drama. It feels like real family drama. Because I think in a lot of ways we kind of relate, you know, I mean, big families like that, you know, disagreements amongst politics and the family and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it can just kind of turn dark. And this movie definitely turns very, very dark with the accidental death of his uncle, Sterling K. Brown. And just from there, it sucks, man, because you feel like they really could have had a special bond, these people. But because of the way that things went down and the decision that T'Chaka made, like, it really created the monster, right? And even though you don't really see him as the monster, Michael B. Jordan, it's just like, well, you created this enemy, and now you have to deal with it. And by the end of the movie, they try to redeem it and try to come back together. But like you said, like, he does not want to be imprisoned, and there was no other option for him. I mean, he murdered a bunch of people. And, you know, there's no way of getting out of it. So him going to prison was not an option, and that's another relatable subject. So a lot of it just feels so real, even though there's a lot of, like, sci-fi in the background. I just feel like this is the most real MCU movie because of these real human relationships.
Definitely. And I again, I'm going with a 9 here. I think this is so strong, just as strong as the hero part of this. And it's funny because you really don't spend nearly as much time with Killmonger and Ulysses, but I think you get so much from them and their performances. And anytime Michael B. Jordan is being directed by Ryan Coogler, it is going to turn out very well, because I think about my 3 favorite Michael B. Jordan performances. It is this one, it is Fruitvale Station, which might be Ryan Coogler's best movie ever, and Creed, which he is also very good in. For all those reasons, I'm also giving this a 9.
Me too, and this is one of the rare occasions where I think I actually gave the villain score higher than the hero score, which I think might be a first.
All right, let's talk about the story. There's something about the first half that I still think is a little bit clunky. And what you have here is you have an isolationist nation that is coming to terms with its ways, and how is it going to become a bigger part of the world. We really only get to see 2 places. So much of this movie is focused in Wakanda. We do go to Korea, and there's a 3rd place. We also spend a little bit of time in Oakland, California. But so much of this movie, where it takes place, it is very not America at all. And I think that is something that's really fascinating to think about when considering some of the other Marvel movies. And so much of this feels like a Bond movie, especially in the first half. The first time that you see the casino in Korea, it is clearly meant to echo what you would see in a Bond movie, specifically Skyfall, I think. And even when you have that chase sequence, and even when you have Shuri showing the technology to Black Panther, there's a lot of James Bond elements in that. But whereas James Bond is very reductive in its sexual politics, this is a movie where the women get to kick ass. And I think where you have T'Challa kind of representing an isolationist perspective at first, but he is ultimately guided to the right side by Nakia, who is his ex and who is much more world-traveled and a spy, and what he is able to do throughout here. And you get to see him, some great fight sequences. There are just a lot of really great moments. And I think there are some Marvel movies where the dialogue can feel very clunky and very matter-of-fact, but there's so much character in the dialogue. This has got to be the best script for a Marvel movie that has ever been written, especially from the dialogue perspective. So even though I still there's still something about that first half that does not quite work for me as well as most of the second half, I gave this an 8.
For me, it's just little continuity things tying in with Civil War, like the timeline, and they kind of really don't acknowledge any outside stuff until, like, you know, you see Winter Soldier at the end of the end credit scene. But just little things like that kind of confuse me a little bit. And then I kind of mentioned earlier the whole having the fight sequence in the middle so the guy can obviously lose and then come back and win the rematch kind of thing. It's one of those tropes that I'm just kind of like so used to seeing in movies that I don't know if I'm one of the few people that notice it or whatnot, but you know, based off that, it's kind of clear and obvious that, you know, he was going to lose the fight. So from there on, I was just kind of like, it's a little predictable now. So, but for my score, it's still an 8 because they still hit a lot of those moments, like those special moments like I said before, those moments when he goes back and talks to his dead father, man, that's some real great stuff right there. I still feel like the best script that the MCU has produced is Winter Soldier. I just feel like that's the most complex and, like adult kind of like, escaping from the whole like comic book thing and doing the spy thing. I felt like Winter Soldier kind of did it better a little bit. So to me, that's still the best script, but this comes close.
I'm not sure about that. I definitely think that there are some really good elements of Winter Soldier. Of course, that movie has also been entered into our superhero pantheon. But for me, when I look at this movie, I just think they did a really good job of handling so much of the dialogue that could have very easily fallen flat and has fallen flat in other Marvel movies. Did you give me a score for story?
I went with 8.
You did go with 8. All right, let's talk about the visuals. Again, this is a very distinctive looking movie with an emphasis on Afrofuturism and a lot of colors, and the colors can be seen in the design of the city. It can be seen in the design of the costumes. This is, of course, an Academy Award-winning score, and a song was also nominated from this movie but did not win. There is tremendous use of visuals. There's some great camera work throughout. The action sequences, I think, are shot very well. I think my one kind of weakness, and the reason that I'm knocking a point off, is I think the actual final fight between Killmonger and Black Panther, it doesn't really work from a visual perspective, especially the earlier moments of the fight. I think it kind of builds up nicely, and their final exchange, of course, is something that is extremely well done and is one of the reasons I gave the story score an 8. But I definitely think that the visuals were a little bit lacking there. But overall, just from a distinctive standpoint, this looks so much better. And even if you go and watch Avengers Infinity War and look at the way that Wakanda is designed in that movie, it is not nearly as well done and as distinctive as it is here in Black Panther. And I think the reasons are obvious, because you have a director who's much more passionate about this and clearly has a much greater understanding of this. But like I said, because this is one of the best visual movies that Marvel has ever done, I'm giving this a 9.
Yeah, I love the colors so much in this movie. It really inspired me personally. Like, after I watched this movie, I knew that the bowl of cars that I do every year for PWG, like, it had to reflect this and, like, reflect the vibrant colors that you see in this movie. And it's not just, like, random color picking, too. It's, like, they chose certain colors for certain tribes for certain reasons. You know what I mean? Purple for like a royalty kind of thing. And I don't have all the details behind all the colors, but if you look it up, there's a specific reasoning for each tribe to get that color and to get that unique look and to get that unique piercing. And there's a lot of detail they went into to kind of represent all these different cultures. You know what I mean? In African and all these different African cultures, and the amount of detail they put in and the amount of music detail they put in, and even tying in. I mean, I know I wasn't crazy for hearing this, but you heard it too. Like the little notes from the Lion King soundtrack, like they threw in there on purpose. I think it's all Disney, right? So for me, just like they knocked it out of the park in terms of that. And the one thing I do criticize is the same thing you do, which is the CGI kind of heavy fight at the end with the suits. Because the suits are CGI, except the one maybe like some exterior shots with T'Challa. A lot of the suit is CGI, so they had 2 CGI suits, and you really kind of tell that. So that kind of knocked it down for me a little bit. And some of like the shots of like the ships and stuff like that was just a little too CGI for me as well. Not as many details as I like, but I do love the detail of the city and the costumes and all that stuff. So for me, it gets a 9 as well. And the score is amazing. And I listened to the score a year later, sometime just working on graphic design stuff or whatever. I'm doing chores around the house or something like that. And I hear all the stars, and I just that song gets me going too, and the other song as well by Kendrick Lamar, I think it was. Or not Kendrick Lamar, I think it was The Weeknd or something like that. But I forget off the top of my head, but both songs are amazing. So
let's talk about the legacy of this movie, and this is just in 1 year the first superhero movie to ever be nominated for Best Picture. This, of course, is the first Marvel Studio movie to ever win an Academy Award, and it now has 3. This cast won a SAG for Best Ensemble in any film. It has generated a lot of relevant conversations about race in this country to a much better degree than other movies that have been nominated. It is one of the more dense Marvel films to ever be created. So much of the fashion has been adopted. Wakanda Forever has been used by this cast and people in general as a sign of unity. And for all of those reasons, I cannot give this anything other than a 10. If this had won Best Picture, I think I would have had to give this like an 11. But here we are. I'm giving this a perfect 10.
Me too. And it really, you put it really, all together, man, because everything you say is correct. And we're still seeing, like, the ramifications of this. And, like, I just can't help but think, like, what this is going to do for the MCU in the long run. Just in cinema as a whole. Like, I still remember hearing the interview from Spike Lee, who just won his first Oscar. Congratulations to Spike Lee. But he says that he watched Black Panther like 5 or 6 times in theaters, and each time he was like crying and just like being blown away and just saying, finally, like, this is finally what I've been waiting for, to see on screen for the first time. And for a guy like Spike Lee, who's been in the business for so long, to be blown away by Black Panther just tells you a lot, I think. And in terms of like a legacy, there's no, yeah, we would have had to have given it 11 if it won. But as much as, we can give it, like, it just kind of shows, like, man, they probably should have extended the Oscar Best Picture a long time ago, because, Dark Knight, I feel, is more historically significant to pop culture and film culture and film history more than Slumdog Millionaire. And Slumdog Millionaire was the movie that won Best Picture that year, and no one remembers that movie. So for me, this kind of was just like a wake-up call that I think comic book movies should get the respect they deserve now, and you can do a hell of a lot more with them. And, I mean, this is just a piece of art. And like I said, it's probably going to go in the national treasury of movies that, are going to be historically and, maintained for future generations to come.
So my total score is a 45, and you?
44, and that's by far the highest scores we've ever given on any movie so far. By far. I think the highest I gave was like a 43 on one of the on Avengers or something like that, maybe even Guardians.
Right, and given that this is a total score of 89, this is going to be one of the highest point getters that we will ever give to a movie. I'll be honest, though, I think there is a distinct possibility that we are going to have a movie later on this year that beats this, possibly even 2, but we will see how it goes. So congratulations. Black Panther is now been entered into the superhero Pantheon, and it joins, as we stated earlier, Iron Man, the Avengers, Captain America Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Iron Man 3. Another MCU movie has been put into the Pantheon, and it is well-deserving, and I am so excited for what Ryan Coogler does next with this franchise, as I have to believe we will be getting a second Black Panther in a couple of years. And let's face it, this movie will be long remembered by fans and will have so much more cultural relevancy than whatever won Best Picture at the 2019 Academy Awards.
And I'm going to go to PWG and do the whole Wakanda thing, Wakanda Forever thing all over again, because last year there was a PWG show the same day that Black Panther came out, and all the marks saw the night before Black Panther, and everyone was just going up to each other and doing the Wakanda Forever thing. It was like the greatest thing ever. And then seeing it in schools and all those like viral videos and stuff, it made my heart, warm up and smile deep down inside. So I just feel like moments like that just transcend into pop culture, and we're in a special moment in time for this. And I mean, I hope Ryan Coogler, man, comes back and just does like 3 movies of Black Panther, because like I said before, Chadwick Boseman, he's like 41, so the time is now to make these movies, and don't wait, and don't hesitate.
All right. So one of the things that we are going to do in the future is we will have burning questions for each movie, but I wanted to keep this episode a little bit on the short side, since this is technically our second episode of the week. But we will be going into a brand new month of movies, and to celebrate the fact that Captain Marvel is coming out in the month of March, we will be looking at 3 other superhero female-led films, that being Supergirl, Elektra, and Wonder Woman, one of which is very good, and the other 2 not so great. Brian, next week we will be reviewing a movie that you and I have never seen before.
Yeah, Supergirl. Supergirl, and how Peter O'Toole ended up in it, I'll never know, and how anyone in that movie like ended up in it, I don't know, because it's got a crazy cast, just a crazy story that really doesn't make sense, and we'll take it one step at a time, but at least I like the first 15 minutes for the visuals.
All right. Well, we want to thank you so much for listening to us on our brand new feed. Please make sure that you are checking out the other podcasts on the real world, whether it be Kevin Ford's Lost podcast from Broadcast Depth, plus whatever Mike and Matt have cooking in the hopper. My understanding is that very soon they are going to be breaking out a Game of Thrones podcast that will be very interesting to hear. And plus, Ben and Matt will be returning with Marvel reviews as well. And that's pretty much it, Brian. So here we are on a brand new feed. Anything else to add before we call it a night?
I almost feel like we could have done it with Spider-Man, but it's still too early. But goddamn, did they deserve Best Animated Movie?
Yes, we are going to get into Spider-Man. We have done a bonus episode on it, but I really feel like we kind of undersold how good that movie is. So we are going to give that movie a full treatment later on this year. And I have a feeling that it will also be the first Spider-Man movie to go into the Pantheon, if you don't count Civil War. But we will tackle that movie much later on this year when we have a full month of animated movies. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast.
Hey, Ante.